So we're here in the Grant Street Agricultural Research Station, otherwise known as my most excellent 100 square foot test food garden, also known as the place where we're getting a whole bunch of our vegetables now. Hello, bee. This little bee here, see that? These bees have been working on these scarlet runner beans for the last 2 weeks, and thank God they're here, because they weren't here the whole month of June, and I had no runner beans at all setting on any of the plants around here. Bye, thank you. But since the bees have been working the runner beans, I've now got dozens and dozens and dozens of runner bean pods setting on. Well, there's another one right there. Hello. Anyway, it's August 10th, Saturday, here in West Lafayette, Indiana, and I'm going to do a fairly quick little video tour of the garden. Quick reminder, this was lawn, 60-year-old sod. Back about May 1st, I dug these beds, two beds here, one's here, the other's here, 100 square feet. Dug them down 2 feet into the solid clay, brought in several hundred pounds of soil and sand and compost and horse manure, and didn't know what would happen. Now, this is serious Indiana clay soil that I discovered underneath this sod. It's been covered up by the sod for a good 60 years, I think, was when this house was built. And if I was a potter, I could probably wash this stuff, set up a kiln, and begin to make myself some mugs, some pots. I'm not a potter, I'm a gardener, and this clay, although it serves as a good foundation for a good soil, is a long way from giving me any kind of soil structure that I can feel confident about. I've been following as closely as I can the concepts of biointensive gardening, meaning that everything is very densely packed. Oh, there's a honeybee. Hello, you lazy thing. And wherever I can, I'm planting crops on top of and underneath each other, and I'm also doing succession planting as much as possible, although everything we see here is still producing, including the potatoes down there. But I'm pretty happy with what's been happening here. In fact, I'm really happy, and I'm really surprised. It's certainly at least this garden this year is a real vindication for the biointensive method. I've got almost no weeds in here. It's not like I've been throwing fertilizer on this garden. It's basically been growing on what was in here when I put these beds together. And with the exception of a cabbage worm infestation in the broccoli and some of the kale in mid to late June, there have been almost no pests. There are no potato bugs. There's only a couple of Japanese beetles. There were definitely a whole bunch of flea beetles turning my eggplant here into lace, but the eggplant seems perfectly happy. It's throwing off eggplants and new blooms. The tomatoes are gonna have to do something about that. Tomatoes are pulling this over. Tomatoes are doing marvelously, despite some, again, pollination problems in June. But they're putting up new buds, and those new buds are turning into tomatoes. So everything's working. We're getting pounds and pounds of food out of here. I'm documenting that, which is a little bit of a pain. You know, a carrot is 1/8 of a pound, but I'm writing it down. So we'll see what happens towards the end of this season, which is a little bit of a problem because we're going to leave end of August, not going to be back till mid-October. which means we'll give the garden another chance to go completely feral, and let the neighbors come in and glean. So we'll see what we get when we come back. But that's still 2 weeks away. And we've got a lot of food to pick out of here before then. There's a couple of bean plants that I planted in the potato patch, having no idea how they would do, but the potatoes were up 3 feet or more and are now, as you can see, falling, getting ready. We've been pulling some red potatoes out of this patch already. That's a volunteer butternut squash. Squash? A Sasquatch? Squash that's decided to come this way rather than heading east. I don't know. Squash wants to go west. Doesn't really make sense. But squashes do what they want. Horseradish planted on the corners of the potato patch. It's a little terrifying, that horseradish. Gonna have to make a lot of shrimp cocktail. And this bed actually was the very first one that I planted and dug up. It's gone through several iterations now. What we've got here are turnips from the heirloom turnip that Bob Wells saved in Cape Cod. These are fabulous turnips. I planted them about the end of June. They didn't do very well because of a lack of water through July, but I've put compost on them, and they're just doing real well. Got yellow onions interplanted there, originally interplanted under the broccoli that was in this bed. The arugula and the tatsoi have gone to seed. I pulled most of those seed heads out to save them. It's a volunteer tomato right there that's setting stuff on. This gorgeous zinnia. Zinnias just don't seem to quit. And here's some of the extra tomatoes in pots. The neighbor took care of them. Probably didn't water them quite enough, so they came back a little bit starved, but they are already putting on blooms, and the blooms are setting tomatoes in just the last 2 weeks. Amazing what a little bit of water will do. This is a Amish paste tomato, which I planted kind of as an afterthought, but right at the end of the bed here. It's thriving, and we're beginning to wonder what to do with all the tomatoes. So the zucchini is, boisterous as zucchini usually is. There are about 5 plants here, I think, again at the end of the bed. They've been fairly well behaved, aside from throwing off 1 or 2 new zucchinis just about every day. Another tomato in a pot, and the rainbow chard. That's it's been a perennial. Essentially, it just keeps growing and growing and growing and providing us with chard. The leeks are finally fluffing out a little bit. That was an experiment. Didn't know how they would do. These are seed heads from the Scarlet Flame mustard, which was a real discovery. A fellow gardener gave some seeds to me. The cucumber. There's 2 or 3 cucumber plants here. They grew some real good cucumbers, half a dozen or so, by the end of June. And then, again, watering problems. There was nothing here, no new cucumbers when I came 2 weeks ago, but now we've got a lot of new cucumbers setting on. green peppers are seem to have been doing very well. There's half a dozen or more of them in there, but we're not getting any blossoms on here, which is something I don't quite understand. Maybe it'll figure it out after a bit. This is a second planting of carrots, and the eggplant is finally putting on a number of new blooms just this last 2 or 3 days. Certainly has got some 2 or 3 eggplants set on. We've already eaten one, and eggplant's always been a little mysterious to me. This is cool. This is Miss Spooner that I planted probably mid to early June underneath the eggplant. There's a bean that I had a couple of bean plants that I had some extra space for, and put that bean in there, and they're doing well. What's not doing well? What's not to like? Tomatoes. Tomatoes are going to be a problem. Going to be a serious problem, these tomatoes, because we're not going to be here in September. And the tomatoes most certainly are going to be here in September. So, volunteer tomatoes and runner beans planted over the watermelon plants and behind the tomatoes, and everybody's doing well. And there's a volunteer butternut squash heading off towards the volunteer pumpkin, which I decided to root to the south rather than let it go into the neighbor's yard. Zinnia, runner beans climbing now on the trellis that it was for snap peas. I interplanted those runner beans. Didn't know how they would work with the snap peas, but the snap peas grew up. Runner beans grew more slowly. Snap peas disappeared. And, oh, there goes that watermelon. Around here on the other side of the corn. Corn is a Oaxacan green. It's a maize. It's really just an experiment. I had no idea how it would do. But we're going to have a lot of cornmeal off of these few plants, I think. A lot of cornmeal, a lot of polenta. Pretty happy with these corn plants. It is kind of spectacular, you know. I mean, those are 8-foot tall corn plants, and I like them. Underneath them are dragon's tongue beans, and the biggest watermelon we have yet. And the zinnias with calendula and oh, what do you call that stuff? Slipped right out of my mind. Nasturtium, of course, I knew that. So this watermelon decided to climb up a tomato, and I had to put up a stake and a little hammock for the watermelon. There are 6 or 7 string bean plants in there that have been producing pretty steadily, not quite as well as the dragon tongue. Everything's pretty crowded in, I tell you. That's the potato patch, Yukon Golds. Didn't plant too many there. I've already taken one plant out. Had about a pound of potatoes. Not real great production. That's that volunteer butternut, and there's that volunteer pumpkin. And so we've got a couple of basil plants in here. We've got the center of the garden is pretty much crowded out with calendula, which has been attracting the bees, thank God. We got a little square foot or more of parsnips that seem to be doing well. And this is the original planting of carrots, and they're doing just fine. A little bit of lemon thyme we put in, and the beets. Beets probably were the wrong variety. They're a small beet called bull's blood seed savers, which is basically everything I planted here. Seed savers, and that's the extent of the 100 square foot garden. Now, getting a lot of mildew, or whatever it's called, on the leaves of the zucchini. Not quite so beautiful and lush green as they were 2 weeks ago. But hey, we don't care what the leaves look like, just as long as it keeps throwing off those zucchinis. All right, this is the Test Food Garden Extension unit here. And speaking of extension, that's butternut squash. That's one I planted, not a volunteer. And what have I got here? About 10 tomato plants, 4 or 5 different varieties. Cherokee, purple, mortgage lifter. All these are seed savers, heirloom mortgage lifter. That one, that's a funny one. It's a very, very large red tomato. Got a few potato plants in there. And these tomatoes, there were a lot of big ones set on when I got back here at the end of July, and very few small ones, but again, pollination's been happening. I watered these really deeply and they all started throwing off blooms. And so we've got a lot more tomatoes happening here now than I thought. And we go from coriander to 2 different kinds of basil to another volunteer tomato plant and another big scarlet runner bean. And that's the garden. This is it. This is the garden. And you were there. August 10th, 2013, West Lafayette, Indiana. Do I want to scale this up? Not this year, not next year. But, you know, with 4 or 5 other people digging beds, we could cover this whole lawn pretty quickly with a powerful lot of veggies.